My mother lifted my chair away from the Thanksgiving table like she was clearing a dirty dish. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that only happens when everyone's agreed in advance not to see you. I stood in the doorway, coat over one arm, a plain white envelope in the other. Steam rose off the turkey. My father stared at his plate. My sister stared at her phone. My stepmother set my chair against the far wall and said the words she'd been saying to me one way or another for 28 years. But here's what none of them knew, and it's the reason my hand was steady while hers shook: the house they were sitting in had never once belonged to them. 3 weeks earlier, I'd found the paperwork that proved it. I was the only person at that table who'd read it, and by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why that chair against the wall was the last mistake my stepmother ever made. Welcome to Silent Revenge Stories, where the quietest person at the table is usually the one holding the truth. If buried secrets and justice on paper are your thing, subscribe, because this one ends with a name carved into a gatepost that someone spent 30 years trying to paint over. My name is Myra Frost. I'm 34, closer to 35 than I realized mattered. I'm a hospice nurse. I sit with people in the last rooms of their lives, and I've learned that dignity is the one thing nobody can give you and nobody can take, though plenty of people try. I could keep a steady voice while a monitor flatlined for a stranger. I could never keep one in my own father's house. I had a small apartment near the hospital that felt like home. The farmhouse where I grew up felt like a museum of a family I was technically part of and never really in. Some kids get the warm chair by the fire. I got told, kindly and constantly, that I was a disappointment, until I stopped asking why. Then, 3 weeks before that Thanksgiving, I found a name I was never supposed to see. And the asking started all over again. The invitation came wrapped in conditions, like it always did. My stepmother Sandra called on a Tuesday in the bright voice she used for church and neighbors, never for me. "We're doing Thanksgiving at the house. You're welcome to come. Welcome to come, like a delivery driver welcome to leave the package at the door. Don't bring any of those strange dishes. No hospital stories at the table." I said I'd think about it. I always said that, and I always went, some animal part of me still hoping this would be the year the door actually opened. This year was different, though, not for the reason she thought. This year I had a reason of my own folded into an envelope in my glove box. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel road, white clapboard, green roof, a wraparound porch, the kind of place strangers slow down to photograph. I grew up there and never once felt like I lived there. There was a cedar tree by the gate, and a gatepost with a square patch of paint always slightly newer than the rest, like a scar someone kept touching up. When I was little I asked my father what had been there. "Nothing," he said. "Just old wood." "But you don't repaint nothing for 30 years. I had a nurse's eyes before I had a nurse's training, the habit of noticing the one wrong detail a family has trained itself to stop seeing. There was a name nobody said in that house, and there was the house itself, which everyone treated as Sandra's kingdom and my sister Brooke's birthright, while I was treated like a guest who'd overstayed since age 6. I learned the rule about my mother by breaking it. I was 8 when I asked Sandra what my mom had been like. She didn't even turn from the stove. "This was never your home, Myra. Don't go digging up things that aren't yours." I thought she meant I didn't belong. I filed it away with all the other small cruelties and stopped asking. Once I found a box in the attic, Sandra took it before I could open it. Once I asked my father, on a good day, what my mother's favorite season was, and he got a look on his face like a man hearing a song from a war, until Sandra walked in, and the look vanished for good. So I learned, you don't ask about Helen. You keep your head down, get good grades, leave for nursing school the first chance you get, and tell yourself you simply aren't the kind of person people keep. There was a word for me in that house: disappointment. Never shouted, Sandra was too careful for that. It came dressed as comparison. Brooke got a car and a tent party for her 16th birthday. I got a card and a reminder not to expect too much. Brooke drifted through community college on the family's dime, and that was called finding herself. I put myself through nursing school on loans and night shifts, and that was called being cold. The math never worked because the math was never the point. The house needed a disappointment, and the role had been assigned to me before I was old enough to audition for it. My half-sister Brooke learned the language young. By her teens she could make me feel like an intruder with a single raised eyebrow. The only one who never caught the disease was my half-brother Danny, 12 years younger. As a kid he used to sneak the good dinner rolls off the table and leave them outside my bedroom door wrapped in a napkin, because he'd noticed I was always served last. He never said why. He was 4. He just knew the table was crooked. A 4-year-old saw it. The adults who were supposed to protect me looked at that same crooked table every day and called it straight. That kind of consistency isn't an accident. It's a script. So why did I say yes, this year? 2 reasons, only one of them real. The one I told myself, 3 months earlier my father, Raymond, had a bad cardiac event, and in the hospital hallway at 2 a.m., with Sandra asleep at home and Brooke posting prayer requests online, I let myself want something I'd given up wanting. One true conversation about my mother before it was too late. He survived. The window I'd imagined closed again the moment Sandra reclaimed the room. But that hospital stay handed me the real reason. Gathering his things from the nightstand, I found, tucked in with the bank statements, an old yellowed envelope with a law firm's name on it and a typed line, Re. Frost Trust. Frost was my mother's name. Mine. A name nobody in that house had spoken in decades. My father saw it in my hand and lunged for it faster than a man 3 days out of cardiac care should move. That's old junk. Give it here. You don't lunge for junk. I'd seen a name I wasn't meant to see, and something in me that had been asleep since I was 6 sat straight up. If you've ever been the disappointment in someone else's story, stay with me. This is the year the paperwork finally caught up, and by the end you'll see exactly what the family's interest really meant to the people who used that phrase against me. I'm not impulsive. Impulsive gets people hurt in my line of work. So I gathered information the way I do at a bedside when something doesn't add up. First I asked my father plainly what the Frost Trust was. A long silence, the silence of a man choosing his lie. It's nothing, honey. Your mother had a little account years ago. It's long closed. A trust is not a little account. People don't build trusts for pocket change, they build them to protect something from somebody. My father wasn't sad when I asked, he was scared. And the only thing that turns grief into fear is guilt. I tried Sandra next, mostly to watch her face. I mentioned the envelope, casually, in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she told me this was never my home 20 years earlier. The temperature dropped exactly like always, but underneath the cold this time I caught something new, fear, covered fast. There's no envelope. You always did have a vivid imagination about how special you are. Some people are just hard to warm to. A woman with nothing to hide doesn't answer a question about paper by attacking the person asking. I'd seen that move before, from families hiding bedsores from state inspectors, deny the thing, then make the witness the problem. I smiled, let her think it worked, drove home, and looked up the number for the county recorder's office. Before I could call, my phone rang. Gerald Pute, Sandra's brother, the family lawyer, a man who'd never once called me in 34 years. Heard you've been asking about old paperwork. As the family's attorney, you should let sleeping dogs lie. Your father's heart can't take this stress. Dredging up your mother's affairs, a nurse like you wouldn't want that on your conscience. Every word was a thread in a net, my father's health, my own guilt, my profession turned into a leash. I've sat with enough grieving families to know exactly what it sounds like when someone's protecting the dying and exactly what it sounds like when someone's protecting themselves and calling it love. This was the second one. I thanked him and made my appointment with the county anyway. A name had floated up from childhood, Mrs. Adler, an old neighbor from when my mother was alive. Still local. I brought a plant and knocked on a Saturday. She looked at me a long moment, eyes filling, and said, "You have Helen's hands." Nobody in my family had ever told me I looked like my mother. She invited me in, made tea, and told me my mother had been funny, stubborn, and had loved that house more than anything except me. Then she set down her teacup. "There's something I've been holding for you. Helen made me promise, give it to Myra when she's grown, and when she comes asking. Not before. You came asking." She returned with a cedar box the size of a bread loaf, its lid worn smooth. Before you open it, you should know what kind of woman your mother was, so you understand why she did what she did. The farmhouse and the land had come down through my mother's family, the Frosts, her name, her people's graves on the property. When she got sick fast in her early 30s, what frightened her wasn't dying. It was what would happen to me after. She loved my father, Mrs. Adler said, but she didn't trust him to hold a line. He was a good man and a weak one. She was terrified someone would talk him into signing the house away and I'd grow up with nothing of hers, not even the ground she came from. So she did the only thing the law would let her do, and made Mrs. Adler swear to hand me the truth herself, someday, if I ever came looking. Inside the box, on top, was a letter, my name in handwriting I'd never seen and somehow recognized in my chest. Myra Bird, it began, a name I had no memory of and my whole body remembered being called. She wrote that she knew I'd be strong, that I came from women who held on to their land through droughts and men who underestimated them. And then the line I will hear in her voice until the day I die, the house is yours, Myra Bird. I put it somewhere they can't sell your roots out from under you. When you're grown, it comes to you. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong in your own home. Underneath, a photograph of a young woman laughing on the farmhouse porch with a baby on her hip, her and me. And under that, a photocopy of the Helen Frost Living Trust, transferring the farmhouse and the land into it. I didn't cry. I understood, finally, the shape of the lie I'd been living inside. The disappointment in that family wasn't a personality. It was a cover story. And the thing it covered was a house. I didn't sleep that night, I planned. A faded photocopy proved what my mother had intended, not what was legally true 28 years later. Trusts get amended. Property gets moved. I made 2 columns on a legal pad, what I know, what I need to find out. Deeds are public record, and they count on you never looking, on you being too small and too convinced you don't deserve to ask. I'd spent my whole life being exactly that. I was done. Monday morning, the county recorder's office, basement of the courthouse, fluorescent and smelling of old paper. Anyone can pull a chain of title. I went backward through 28 years and found it, a deed recorded the year I turned 6, the year my mother died, transferring the farmhouse from Helen Frost into the Helen Frost Living Trust. Exactly as the copy in the cedar box said. I kept scrolling forward, heart knocking, waiting for the deed that undid it, the transfer back out to my father, to Sandra, to anyone. It didn't exist. Not once in 28 years. The house I'd been told I didn't belong in had been sitting inside my dead mother's trust, in my name, the entire time. Everyone in my family had been living in a house that was never theirs to give, keep, or hold over me. Small towns leak. By the time I got home there was a voicemail from Gerald, his salesman warmth now edged with panic. I understand you've been at the courthouse pulling records on the family home. Whatever you think you found, you don't understand the full context. Come see me and I'll explain everything. Come see me and I'll explain everything. Translation, come into my office, where I control the documents and the narrative, and let me talk you back into being small. I didn't call him back. A man only blocks the door when he knows what's behind it. And the more I thought about Gerald, present at every family event my whole life, the trust's attorney for 2 decades, the darker the question got. Somebody had kept this buried for 28 years. Somebody with the training to do it. I traced the old law firm's successor to a 2-attorney office and made an appointment with Carol Vance, gray-suited, unhurried, the kind of lawyer who's watched a lot of families come apart over money and isn't surprised by any of it. I brought the cedar box, the letter, the photocopy, my printouts. She read everything in silence, then disappeared into a back room and came back with a thin accordion folder, her flat lawyer face no longer flat. Miss Frost, your family has been telling you this house is theirs your entire life, and no one ever told you about this trust? No one. She tapped the folder. Then you should know what's in here, because somebody had a legal duty to tell you. And they didn't. Here's what stopped being a feeling and became a fact. The trust was real, still in force. My mother had transferred the farmhouse into it the year before she died, named me, Myra Frost, sole beneficiary, to receive the property outright at 35. She'd named a trustee to manage it until then, my father, Raymond. A trustee isn't an owner, Carol said, watching my face. He's a fiduciary. He has legal duties: preserve the asset, act in your interest, keep you informed, provide accountings. Based on what you've told me, your father has done essentially none of that for 28 years. Then she asked my birthday, went still, and looked up. You turn 35 this month. I did the math out loud because I needed to hear it. Thanksgiving was the fourth Thursday, my birthday the Saturday after. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Carol said, this property is legally yours outright. The clock your mother set 28 years ago runs out that weekend. The question is what you want to do with the time before then. It got worse. Carol pulled the same liens I'd glimpsed at the county. Brooke had taken out a substantial loan for her event planning business and secured it against the farmhouse, a house she believed would be hers, that she'd never owned. My father had signed as the apparent owner. Gerald had handled the paperwork that made it look routine. That collateral was never hers to pledge, Carol said. Lenders take a dim view of that. So does the law. No wonder Brooke had worked so hard, her whole life, to keep me small. She was fighting for her financial life against me before either of us understood the stakes. The file also showed exactly how the truth stayed buried. Every piece of trust correspondence went, by law, to the trustee's address, the farmhouse, where Gerald made sure it never reached the one person it was legally about. One old letter asked whether the trustee intended to inform the beneficiary as she approached adulthood. Gerald's reply, on his own letterhead, the trustee considered it not in the family's interest at this time. Not grief. Not a weak man drowning in memory. A strategy, drafted and maintained by a professional who knew exactly what the law required and chose, year after year, to do the opposite. Every cold comparison to Brooke, every birthday card telling me not to expect too much, it all had a purpose. They needed me small so I'd never go looking. My first feeling was clean, hot rage, the kind that wants to scream the truth across a holiday table until the whole town hears. I set it down. Rage never built anything for me, it only burns. Sandra's weapon had always been humiliation, Gerald's the soft leash of warnings, loud, performative tools. I decided not to fight them with their weapons. I don't yell. I document. Carol would prepare certified copies of the deed, a formal letter naming me beneficiary, notice of the upcoming distribution, and a demand for accounting. Quiet, patient, undeniable paper. When do you want to tell them? Carol asked. I already knew. At Thanksgiving. At the table. 2 days before, my father called, alone, his voice thin. Are you coming Thursday? A long pause, the pause of someone standing at the edge of a true thing. Your mother, Helen, there are things I should have. Then Sandra's voice, sharp, in the background. Raymond, who are you talking to? And the truth folded itself back up. Just drive safe. Don't bring anything. He hung up. For one moment I felt the old pull to spare a sick old man the reckoning. Then I remembered, he'd known for 28 years, and even now, given one last chance to tell me himself, he'd folded the second she spoke. That was who he was, a man who, given a choice between an uncomfortable truth and a comfortable silence, chose silence every time and let me pay for it. The day before Thanksgiving, Carol confirmed the loan, Brooke's whole glossy little empire, financed on collateral she never legally had. That night I assembled the envelope, nothing but truth, finally written down where everyone could see it, the certified deed, Carol's letter naming me sole beneficiary, notice that the trust would distribute outright that Saturday, notice of a formal accounting to come. I made a second, smaller envelope for Danny, not documents, just a note, because he was the one person I refused to let get caught in the blast without a hand reaching back. I thought about the gatepost, the newer square of paint, and finally understood, they'd painted over my mother's name on the gate of my mother's house, and spent 28 years painting over it on me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. Thanksgiving morning, before I even left, Danny texted, Mom's in a real mood, already snapping about the seating and going on about you. Maybe skip this year, for your own sake. Love you, sis. Love you, sis, words I'd gotten from exactly one person in that family, ever, and it was the one with the least power and the most heart. Sandra had heard something through the grapevine. Her answer wasn't fear, she had no idea how close I was. Her answer was to double down, to put the disappointment back in her place, hard, in front of everyone. She had no idea she was setting her own stage. I texted back, I'm coming. Whatever happens today, you're not in trouble. Stay calm. And Danny, thank you for the rolls. I never forgot. I drove out past the cedar tree, the gatepost, the fence plot where my mother's people were buried. A full driveway, cousins, a neighbor, plenty of witnesses. I sat a moment looking at the porch where a young woman had once laughed with a baby on her hip. Not today would I be small enough to be tolerated. I wasn't even there for revenge, I was there to put the truth on the table, in the light. I left the cedar box at home but carried my mother's photograph in my coat pocket. I climbed the steps of my own house and walked into the last Thanksgiving they would ever run. Inside, good cloth, good plates, candles already lit. Sandra at the head, directing traffic, clocking my plainclothes and steady face with visible annoyance. Brooke setting out glasses, baby Lily on her hip, gnawing a roll, entirely innocent, and I'd already promised myself she'd never pay for any of this. My father, smaller than he used to be, met my eyes for half a second and looked away, and that told me everything about how the day would go. Gerald hovered with a wine glass, trying to look casual, not quite managing it. Danny gave me a small, worried smile. I hung my coat, photograph still in the pocket, and went to take my usual seat at the foot of the table, the cheap seat, the disappointment seat. That was when Sandra stood up. She walked the length of the table, put her hand on the back of my chair, and in a bright voice built to carry, said, "Oh, Myra, there's been a little change. We're tight on space with the baby." She carried my chair across the room and set it against the far wall. A place that was not a place. The cousin studied his plate. Brooke smirked. My father stared into the candle flames like a man praying for the floor to open. Sandra straightened and delivered the line she'd clearly polished all morning, gently, sweetly, so she could later swear she'd only meant the chairs. There's no room for disappointments at this table. The old me would have gone straight to that wall. Instead, I felt calm, the oceanic calm of a nurse when the monitor flatlines and someone has to be steady. I didn't go to the wall. I set my bag down slow and deliberate, and the small ordinary sound made everyone look. "You're right, Sandra," I said, in the voice I used to tell a family their mother has hours left, quiet, level, impossible to ignore. There isn't room at this table for disappointments. A flicker of triumph on her face, dead the instant I kept going. So let's talk about who the real disappointment at this table actually is. My father looked up, eyes wet. "Please, Myra. Not here. 28 years too late. Dad, I found some old paperwork while you were in the hospital. Remember the envelope you grabbed back? Turns out I'm a very thorough reader." I walked the length of the table and set the white envelope on his plate. Nobody moved. "Open it, Dad." He didn't. So Sandra, who could never bear to lose control of a room, snatched it up herself, tore it open, and started reading fast, hunting for the flaw, the bluff. I watched the exact second the words stopped meaning what she wanted. The color left her face. "What is this?" It wasn't really a question anymore, so I answered it for the whole table. "A certified copy of the deed to this house. My mother, Helen Frost, put this farmhouse and this land into a trust before she died. One beneficiary. Me. This house has been held in my name since I was 6. Not Dad's. Not yours, Sandra. Mine. You've been living in my house, at my table, telling me I didn't belong here, for 28 years. I looked at her. You knew what you'd try to do today. You were right. Then, to the room, this Saturday, on my 35th birthday, the trust ends and the house comes to me outright. The way my mother arranged it, so no one could ever sell my roots out from under me. My father took his hands from his face, and what was there wasn't anger, it was a man looking at a debt he'd always known would come due. Myra, I was going to tell you. Every year I told myself I'd tell you. The deepest cut, he hadn't been deceived. He'd been the trustee. My dying mother had trusted him to hold her daughter's home safe, and instead he'd let Sandra rule it, let Gerald bury the paperwork, let Brooke borrow against it, and said nothing across every table for 28 years. You were going to tell me, I repeated, not shouting. The not shouting was what broke him. You could have told me on the phone 2 days ago. You always stop the second she walks in. He wept, openly, an old sick man crying at the head of a table that was never his. I didn't hate him. I finally understood him. He'd rather be comfortable than honest, and I'd paid for his comfort my whole life. That was when Sandra detonated. The church voice was gone. You ungrateful little, we raised you, we fed you, we housed you, my roof, I said, level. And this is how you repay this family? Ambushing your sick father on a holiday? Under the mask was exactly what I'd glimpsed in her kitchen weeks earlier, not a cruel queen, but a frightened woman whose whole life sat on a foundation she'd always known was stolen. It was never your home, I said, as gently as she'd ever said it to me, and it landed like a slap because now the whole room knew it was true. I handed her own words back to her. You told me there's no room at this table for disappointment. You were right. So I'm taking the room back, starting with the woman who spent 28 years convincing a little girl she was worthless, so that little girl would never look too closely at her own home. Sandra opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She sat down hard in the chair that, I realized, had never been hers either. Brooke's voice shook. This doesn't change anything, my business, I have a loan, and then she heard herself. You borrowed against a house that was never yours to pledge, I said quietly. It's in the public record. When the house comes to me, that collateral disappears. She sank into her chair, clutching Lily, who started to fuss. I turned to Gerald, edging toward the door. 20 years as counsel on my mother's trust. You knew I was the beneficiary. You wrote, on your own letterhead, that informing me wasn't in the family's interest. You skipped every accounting the law required. My attorney is Carol Vance. She has the full file. There will be a formal accounting demand, a petition to remove the trustee, and a complaint to the state bar with your name on it. He picked his wine glass back up just to have something to hold. His hand shook so badly the wine trembled. But there were 2 people at that table I had no quarrel with, and I made sure the whole room heard it. To Danny, standing in the kitchen doorway looking like he wanted to disappear, none of this is about you. You were a kid, you did the only right thing in this whole house, and you were 4 years old when you did it. When the house is mine, there's a place in it for you, if you want it. Not ever on the street. Not by me. To Brooke, rocking Lily, both of them crying, whatever happens between you and me, that child will never go without a roof while I have one. I won't punish a 3-year-old for what the adults in this room did. That's the difference between me and the people who raised me. Sandra flinched like I'd struck her, and maybe I had, with the only weapon that ever really lands, being, out loud, in front of everyone, the better person. Lily reached one small hand toward me, and I touched her fingers for a second, then stepped back. I walked to the far wall, picked up the chair Sandra had carried there to shame me, brought it back to the table, and pushed it in neat and square. I wasn't going to sit in it, I'd lost my appetite for that table years ago, but I wasn't going to let her last act be the one that stood. The chair belonged at the table. So did I. I just no longer needed their permission for either. Happy Thanksgiving, I said, and meant it without any venom at all, which unsettled them more than screaming would have. I took my coat, felt my mother's photograph in the pocket, and walked out of the house that would legally be mine in 2 days. That Saturday, on my 35th birthday, the Helen Frost Living Trust did exactly what my mother built it to do 28 years earlier. The farmhouse distributed to me outright, free and clear. I stopped at the gate on my first drive out as legal owner, scraped away the patch of newer paint, and found, carved faint but there into the old wood underneath, the name Frost. I painted it fresh, white, readable from the road. The accounting demand went out the following week, 28 years of debts my father allowed against my house, rent and lease money that should have been mine, duties never performed. He didn't fight any of it, some part of him seemed relieved to finally set the weight down. I gave Sandra and my father a fair, generous timeline to move, longer than I owed them, because Danny asked and because I wasn't interested in cruelty, only in being done. Gerald's bar complaint isn't looking good for him. Brooke's business collapsed the moment the collateral vanished, the way anything collapses when it was built on something that was never yours. Danny took the spare room, then a fair rent and his own space in the house that's now mine. He's the only one I kept, and it cost me nothing, because he was the only one who'd ever offered me anything for free. We have dinner sometimes now, at the long table, with the candles lit, and there is finally room. If someone has ever moved your seat to make you smaller, hear me, go find your paperwork, find your worth, and put your own chair back at your own table. Comment if you'd have walked out without a word too. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Silent Revenge Stories, because the quiet ones always have the last word.